Alright guys, so Joe Rogan, arguably the single largest podcaster in the entire country, recently decided to have on Kid Rock to his program. And they're in the broader context of talking about Israel's, what I think is a genocidal war on the people of Gaza. And it's quickly going to devolve into a back and forth over whether or not it is morally justifiable or even a good military strategy to just completely obliterate innocent civilians as a part of your military campaign, right? And I do want to point out that this is, yes, the same Kid Rock that prominent conservative commentators like Jack Pacific, for example, recently came out at the RNC and said in the midst of talking about this conspiracy surrounding Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce and Pfizer and Bud Light and Democrats and George Soros, said that, the liberals may have Taylor Swift, but we have Kid Rock. We got Kid Rock on our side, guys. So let's not worry about it. Let's just go ahead and listen to what this absolute intellectual powerhouse has to say about this, as even Joe Rogan is not really feeling it.
If you lived in Gaza, you would be convinced that it's the end of the world, right? Because It is the end of the world in one place. In that spot, it's the end of the world. But where you are, it's not. And you got to look at it that way. And when I look at it that way, I'm like,
the only wars we won were fucking ones we were the most brutal motherfuckers on the planet, which I don't disagree with what Israel's doing. It's like they should just go in there and be like, you know what? We want our hostages back. If we don't have them back, clock starts now in fucking 24 hours. We're going to start bombing motherfuckers and killing fucking civilians, 30, 40,000 a fucking time. So you civilians better fucking pack up and fucking get these fucking motherfuckers and you go against Hamas.
Okay. I gotta pause it already here. We got so much packed into this, right? Number one, the concept that the only wars that the United States has been, like, quote unquote successful in winning, that there's some sort of a correlation with success and complete disregard for civilian life is just completely delusional. It's ahistorical, right? You could just take a couple wars in post-World War II American history, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. I mean, in the Korean War, we essentially flattened North Korea as a part of that, as we were allied with the fascists in the South, okay? Killed how many hundreds of thousands or millions of people who died as a part of that war, and ended up where we're at, basically to this point today, with the 38th parallel dividing North and South Korea. Not exactly a complete military success there, even though, hundreds of thousands, millions of people died as a part of that war. The northern portion of Korea was completely obliterated, all civilian infrastructure. There was no regard for innocent civilians as a part of that war. Not exactly a success, right? It got to the point where even guys like Curtis Bombs Away LeMay, and go look him up if you want to learn about a little bit of his sort of like psychopathic history in American warfare. But even he admitted at the time that there's almost nothing left to bomb in North Korea because of how brutal we were being to civilians. Or take Vietnam, okay? Where we not only were bombing the shit out of Vietnam, but also bombing Cambodia and Laos into oblivion. To the point where, even to this day, people are still losing limbs because they're accidentally stepping on unexploded ordinances from a war that took place decades ago, that the United States left as a part of our legacy in those countries. So the idea that there's a correlation between brutality towards civilians or disregard for civilian life and military success is not only delusional, but I actually think it's like the opposite of reality. Because, and this applies to Hamas as well, when you go in and you have a complete disregard for civilian life, and as he says there, go in with the intention to kill hundreds or tens of thousands of civilians every single day that the hostages are not released, when you go in with that mindset, what do you think that that's doing to the innocent civilians inside of Gaza? Or any country for that matter? Do you think that that's going to turn them onto your side? When you're going and dropping bombs on their heads and dismembering their family members and friends? Do you think that that's going to win them over to your side? Or do you think that maybe that would potentially even harden their support for what is essentially the only military organization inside of Gaza, Hamas, that is fighting against this brutal occupying power that is obliterating their family? I mean, which do you think is more likely in that scenario? Not exactly a great strategy. Not only from a moral perspective, but also from a strategic perspective, right? And then on top of that, he adds in this notion about the hostages, right? I mean, guess what? There have been less than a handful of hostages that have been returned via the brutal military campaign that Israel has been waging, by the way, which is one of the most ironic parts of what he just said, which is the idea that like Israel hasn't been engaging in a war with no regard for civilian life. They've already been basically taking the strategy that Kid Rock is proposing here, but they have only returned a tiny handful of hostages through their military raids and their military invasion and bombing campaigns, right? The bulk of the hostages that have made it back to Israel from Hamas captivity have been through a ceasefire deal. When we had that temporary pause in the fighting back in, I think it was November of 2023, that's when the bulk of the hostages were returned. So if you actually wanted the hostages to be returned safely to Israel, you wouldn't be pushing for a total eliminationist military campaign. You would be pushing for a ceasefire. But anyways, he continues here. We're going to get to Joe Rogan's response.
You fucking go against them. We're not playing fucking games with you. But that's the only thing people understand. This is what happened in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Boom. Just wiped out. They're like, oh, yes, we don't have Supreme Leader anymore. We did not know you had such big bombs.
Yeah, but everybody has big bombs now. The problem is you use a big bomb. You set a precedent that they can use a big bomb.
They don't have one.
Well, they don't, but their allies do.
Then we
That's
bomb
the real
fuck
problem.
out of them. Someone's going to learn.
Yeah, but
you gotta get your ass beat hard enough.
You can't just nuclear bomb people.
I didn't say nuke them.
Nuclear bomb you back.
No, I didn't say nuke
Okay, you said
them.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I thought you meant it like
no,
that.
No, I was saying that just the brute force of strength used in those.
Yeah, but
conflicts.
even a conventional bombing campaign, if you want to do that somewhere, they can do that to your place. And this is what we have to
fuck
avoid.
around and find out.
Yeah, until someone launches nukes. And then we have our civilization is over. The world as you know it ceases to exist. There is no more electricity. Whatever tools you have are things you find. And a small percentage of us are going to make it to breed and then make new kids.
I like how you said
go
us.
out into the world.
Okay. So, I mean, yeah, Joe is kind of right in the sense of the threat of nuclear war. If we were to get engaged in some sort of a hot war with Russia or with China or any other nuclear-armed superpowers for that matter, I mean, that part of it is true. That risk is legitimate and real. But, I mean, also what he was saying there earlier, even if you're not talking about nuclear weapons or atomic bombs being used in this kind of a warfare, let's be specific to Israel, right? Because there are many high-level politicians, including maybe even Netanyahu himself, who do want to expand this war to be directly engaged with other elements in the region, like Hezbollah, for example, inside of Lebanon. And Hezbollah is not the same as Hamas. Hezbollah is arguably the single most well-armed and trained non-state actor or non-state militia in the entire world. They have the firepower, they have the missiles, they have the military capabilities to kill thousands of Israeli civilians if Israel engaged in a direct war with them, as it seems like many of them want to do. And so this attitude from Kid Rock here, and I can't believe that I'm like dissecting this as if this is like a political analysis here that he's giving here. It's really not. But this is maybe emblematic of what a lot of average people think. So I think it's important to respond to it, right? But this fuck around and find out attitude that he has, where might makes right. We have the nuclear bombs, we have more firepower than you, and so why wouldn't we just go in guns blazing with no regard for any other tangential effects that could come from that? I mean, it's number one, again, insane from the perspective of how many civilians will be caught up in that kind of an aggressive military operation with no regard for civilian life. But number two, again, Israel may be the superior military power to a group like Hezbollah. But you're talking about risking the lives of thousands and thousands of your own civilians to directly engage with them. Okay? So this fuck around and find out attitude, it may sound cool in the moment. It may make you look like, oh, look, we're the stronger guys. We definitely take them, right? But at the end of the day, might makes right. It's not a legitimate foreign policy approach to these kinds of issues, believe it or not. Right? I mean, this is what the U.S. learned with the Taliban, for example. Was the Taliban a stronger overall military force than the United States military? No. Did they still beat us in the sense that they are now in power as they were before the invasion of Iraq? Yeah. I mean, you could make the same argument with Vietnam. I mean, you could make the same argument with, again, North Korea. This shit does not necessarily just depend on how many aircraft carriers you have, how many bombs you can drop from the sky, especially when you are fighting a group similar to Hamas that is in many ways ingrained in the population that you are fighting. It's much more difficult to fight a guerrilla army or an army that is using guerrilla tactics or a militia that is using those tactics than it is to fight like a standard modern mechanized military apparatus, right? It's a very different situation. He obviously doesn't have any analysis surrounding any of that kind of a conversation. He just simply thinks that if you're the stronger military power, you can go in and obliterate whoever you want and you are going to win the war and then something, peace forever after that, I guess is his mindset. No calculation of the potential reverberations from that in terms of regional stability or in terms of the backlash that other regional actors may have on you, where you might be on the other end of the fucking around and finding out. But anyways, let's just go ahead and continue.
I think
There's very few people that are going to live, man.
Well, it's like me and you could probably
maybe.
figure it out.
Yeah. I have chickens too. I have elk in the freezer too. But that
can
freezer's not going to stay on.
You can gut an elk.
I can gut an elk.
Yeah.
But that freezer's not going to stay on.
I love how they're having like a serious conversation about like what would our lives look like after nuclear apocalypse, right? Like that's like a serious conversation that we need to be engaging in right now.
So I'm going to lose most of my meat. Unless I turn it into jerky, you're going to have to do something to figure out how to fucking get by because the world is going to be different. You know, you're not going to have any electricity forever. For the rest of your life, there'll be no electricity.
Just throwing paint at the wall, but what if we empower the people of Palestine who could be good people? I don't know.
Just
last I checked, most of these motherfuckers hate us. But and I'm not saying...
Oh, wow. I wonder why they might hate us. I wonder why Palestinians may hate the United States, the country that is actively arming and funding a genocide against their own people. I wonder if they may have some legitimate reason to maybe not like the United States government. I mean, is this really the line of logic that we're going with here? I mean, if you want to talk about empowering Palestinian people such that maybe a group like Hamas would not be empowered to lead Palestinians in Gaza, for example, maybe step one would be to end the occupation, to end the apartheid, to end the ongoing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and to give them actual legitimate autonomy and sovereignty. That would maybe be like step one. Maybe they won't hate you as much if you aren't continuously dropping bombs on themselves and their family members. Could be a starting point. I don't know.
And all the people do. There's probably a lot that don't. Just like in Iran, the population is, because of the Iraq war, there's so many under 50 there. That's like the majority.
The thing is, these guys don't have access to other information outside of where they live. And then on top of that,
Elon, send the Starlink. We'll send them some fucking guns. Fucking let's go.
The problem is, most of them would be so opposed to Israel that they would want to use those guns to go attack Israel.
Well, then now we have due reason to fuck them all up.
Yeah, but if you think about you're a kid and you don't know why there's a conflict between Palestine and Israel, and you're living in Palestine, and then they start bombing, and then they kill your mom. Yeah, but you didn't do, but you didn't do anything.
It sounds like Bud Light.
And then you get guns. You're gonna go want to attack people. You're going to want to avenge them. You're going to want to join whatever group, whatever. So
why did World War II end?
Well, why did...
Okay, I just got to say, like, that was a good point from Joe. Straight up. That was a good point that he just made there, right? If you are a Palestinian who is, and keep in mind, almost half the population of Gaza are children right now. And so if you are a child who grows up in what is effectively the world's largest open-air prison, where Israel deploys tactics that they call mowing the lawn, where they frequently go in and they bomb, civilians and civilian infrastructure inside of Gaza as a part of their like national security approach. If you have your family members killed, your mother is killed or whatever by this foreign occupying power that has put you in an economically deprived situation where the humanitarian situation is absolutely catastrophic. Yeah, you're probably not going to like that occupying power, right? I mean, it would be almost understandable to some extent that you would grow up with some sort of, a lack of an affinity for that country that is doing that to you and your people, right? I mean, and this is something that just amazes me with Americans, right? Because we're supposed to be the country that was, in terms of our origin or our national mythos surrounding the founding of the United States, we're supposed to be the guys who threw off this tyrannical government that was oppressing us at the foundation of the United States of America, right? But you have no conceptual ability, even though you think of the founders of the United States as the greatest heroes in history, no potential way to analyze how somebody growing up in Gaza might feel in a much more difficult situation, right? No analysis of how growing up under those kinds of conditions might radicalize you against the people who are putting you under those conditions in the first place, right?
World War II start.
Checkmate.
You got a dude who's fucking methed up. You got a Adolf Hitler, methed up, charismatic dude that wants to take over the world. That's how it started. You know, how did it end? Nuclear bombs. But it also ended through attrition. You know, at the end of it, like the devastation on both sides was so horrible.
Terrible. But where was the end? What was
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
No, but what was the alternative?
Well, that's that case. You know, the thing about whenever you're bombing cities, like
what if that was your house? What if that was your house? Let's call your house Israel, and your neighbors are Palestine.
Okay.
Those motherfuckers you got a family of 4. They come over and fucking take out 2 of them in the fucking worst way. Are you really gonna like worry about like what type of force you're using at your neighbors?
No, you definitely
Well, the
wouldn't.
wife didn't have anything to do with it. We got to make sure she's okay and get some aid. This and there's like, no, I'm sorry, man. This is fucking war. It's terrible. It's the worst thing on earth. I'm a peaceful man.
Right, but you're not supposed to pick civilian targets. That's actually a
You
war
can't
crime.
fight war like that. When
But you're not supposed
they're
to
hiding
pick
in
civilian targets.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that is a war crime, straight up, as Joe Rogan was just saying there. Now, I mean, I think what Kid Rock was saying at the end is pretty much a perfect encapsulation of his warped worldview and specific analysis, if you even want to call it that, on what is currently happening in Gaza, because he gives this analogy of, imagine if you were chilling at home, right, with your family, you got 4 family members or whatever, and some guy just breaks into your home and they kill a couple of your family members. Are you going to care about, you know, being peaceful towards them or regarding their own family's lives who may not have had anything to do with the attack that this person waged against you and your family? And it's just a perfect analogy because you could just as easily, if not in a much more, you know, easy capacity, make that same argument in the reverse and say you could use that as a justification for what Hamas did on October 7th, right? I mean, that's the whole justification that he's using. He's saying that Hamas committed such horrible atrocities on October 7th, which there were war crimes that were committed on that day. I'm not trying to downplay that. But to use that, what happened on October 7th, to say, well, now Israel gets to go in, guns blazing, with complete disregard for civilian lives and massacre tens of thousands of people on a daily basis, I mean, how do you not understand the hypocrisy of what you're saying? Because the Palestinian people are the same Palestinian people who at the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, during what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, were forced by the hundreds of thousands, in many cases directly at gunpoint, to flee from their land. They were forced off of their land, forced out of their homes to make way for the State of Israel, for Jewish Israeli settlers, okay? And so how could you not, with any sort of even mild Wikipedia-level understanding of the decades of ethnic cleansing, the decades of illegal occupation of Palestinians and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, how could you not understand that same argument could be made about Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th? You could say, look at what the Israelis have done to us for the last number of decades. So why should Hamas go into Israel in this attack and have any sort of semblance of regard for civilian lives? Why shouldn't Hamas go in a revenge tour and just massacre as many Israelis as they possibly can get their hands on? I mean, that is the logic of what he is saying here, which is ironically the logic that he says that the Palestinians have, right? But that's exactly what he is saying Israel should do to the Palestinians as some sort of a revenge. And I mean, keep in mind, guys, we know the data on this. We know the statistics on this. Israel has killed not only more Palestinian civilians in Gaza in a total sense, but also as a percentage of those killed, right? If you compare the percentage of civilians killed versus militants killed, and you compare Israel's offensive into Gaza since October 7th, and you compare Hamas's offensive into Israel on October 7th, Israel beats them by both metrics. In the total amount of civilians killed, by massive numbers, and in the percentage of civilians killed. So, I mean, the notion that, like, Israel has the moral high ground, and they have such moral high ground over the brutal barbarity of Hamas, that they then have the justification to go in and massacre incalculable amounts of civilians, I mean, what do you even say in response to that? So, I mean, listen, I'm not trying to pretend as if, like, Kid Rock is somebody who needs to be, like, intellectually debated in some way. But I do think it's interesting because I think, you know, number one, that this is probably the perspective of lots of people in this country, where they say, you know, if this had happened to my family, then I would have no care in the world for, protecting the civilian lives. I would want revenge. I would want to go and eliminate the threat that attacked me and my family, right? I think that's a thought process that a lot of Americans have, unfortunately, without any real understanding of the broader context of Israel and Palestinians. And I think that that's unfortunate. Now, I mean, thankfully, at least to some degree, Joe Rogan is pushing back on that, right? He's not totally on board with the rampant war crimes approach to warfare. And I think that is kind of his more normie side coming through in this clip. So anyways, I mean, I'm going to finish it off there. I don't know how much more I could possibly say about it, other than if you want to know more about the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, arguably, I think, one of the most egregious war crimes in the history of the world. I highly recommend everybody goes and watches Sean's long-form breakdown of whether or not that was actually justified or necessary to end World War II, or whether or not it was more so just a U.S. show of force towards the Soviet Union to declare that we are the prominent superpower in a post-World War II kind of world. So I'll probably link that down in my description if you guys want to go and watch that. But anyways, I mean, I'm going to finish it off there. Long video here. I know that it's not necessarily like the most substantive person to respond to, but maybe this is something that a lot of Americans think about in this way. And thankfully Joe is not at the point now where he can completely get on board with that.